everybody. Welcome back for another video. I hope you are all doing really well. My name is Leah and I love researching and talking about really creepy and bizarre stories. So thank you so much for coming back to the channel. Grab yourself some tea, maybe some hot chocolate, grab a pumpkin spice latte. It is that time of year after all. Grab a cozy blanket or an animal, get cozy, and let's get into today's scary curiosity. On April 21st, 1977, 3 teenage boys were driving along a deserted road in Dover, Massachusetts. The driver of that vehicle spotted a very eerie-looking, almost alien-like creature who was just creeping along the side of the road. His first thought was that this has to be a dog or a cat or maybe even a baby moose. But he quickly realized that what he was looking at was nothing that he had ever seen before. And as he was driving past it, this creature noticed him as well. It stared at the driver, making eye contact with these 2 bright, glowing eyes. And it was crystal clear that whatever this thing was, it didn't belong to any known animal group here on Earth. It's been 45 years since this encounter, and it's still a mystery as to what this creature was. What he saw that night led to one of the most famous cryptid cases throughout the United States. And so, without further ado, I am going to be telling you all about the Dover demon encounters. Okay, so first things first, we have to start with the definition of a cryptid. Because of course, I've heard the term cryptid before, but I wouldn't have been able to give you an actual definition. But basically, cryptids are animals that are believed to exist, but their existence is not recognized by science. So think Loch Ness Monster, Sasquatch, or my personal favorite, the North American house hippo.
It's nighttime in a kitchen just like yours. All is quiet. Or is it?
And if you are Canadian, then you know. What makes the Dover demon sighting really stand out, in my opinion, is that it was seen on 3 separate occasions by different people in a very short time span and in different areas of one city. If it had only been seen by one person and there was one single account of this creature, then it would be much less believable, right? Like, I'm not saying that I 100% believe the reports, but I do think that because each sighting happens separately, I just think it gives it a bit more credibility. And just adding to this, I think it's more credible because it also happened in 1977. You know, there wasn't any instant communication between these 3 groups. They weren't planning to put this stuff up on social media and go viral. And if it was just one big hoax, I would argue that they definitely could have made their stories more believable. So I'm going to give you a description of this creature, just so I can start creeping up your night. The creature's head was so large and so disproportionate to the rest of its body that it looked as though its painfully small neck could barely hold it up. So its head was this oblong watermelon / egg shape, and it had these 2 big glowing orange eyes. And because the eyes had a glassiness to them, the driver of the car compared them to glowing orange marbles. And just to add to the creepiness of all of that, apparently it also had no eyelids. So right away, because I always jump to the craziest solution that I can possibly get to. It's an alien. This thing's abdomen was also very short compared to its limbs, and the arms and legs were also very skinny. And adding to its alienish appearance, it lacked common facial features. Like, it had no nose, no ears, and no mouth. And interestingly, it also didn't have a tail, so a lot of animals were immediately ruled out. It didn't have any fur, and instead it was covered in a tan-colored shark-like skin that was comparable to sandpaper. It definitely had hands with very long fingers, and the fingers appeared to work really well for gripping things, and this was obvious in the way that the creature was moving. So, at 10 o'clock p.m., 17-year-old Bill Bartlett, along with two friends, was driving his Volkswagen down Farm Street in Dover, Massachusetts. Now, looking at this road on Google Earth, today it's very dense with thick forest on each side, just beautiful green trees, like old grand houses, and tons of these archaic but really beautiful low stone walls. And these walls look like they're basically on every property. I mean, you can't deny it, this street is beautiful. So it's nighttime, and they're driving along this road. And while Bill's friends are talking, Bill is paying attention to the road in front of him. He looks over to the side of the road, and he sees a large creature slowly creeping along one of these old stone walls. He was driving about 55 kilometers per hour, so he wasn't going super fast, and the headlights were on, and they shine directly at this little creature. And he gets a really good look at this thing because it was basically only about 10 feet away from the car. This creature looks directly at him. Its eyes are glowing bright orange in the car's headlights, and he immediately knows that this is not a cat out on a night stroll. It's not a dog. It's not a fox. It is something that he has never, ever seen before. He cannot name what this animal or creature is. And Bill said that he grew up around animals. Like, he should have been able to recognize whatever this thing was, and he didn't. So it was using its long, thin fingers to grasp onto the rock wall and creep along the top of it. And it looked to be much closer to a human than any other animal. And as I mentioned earlier, it had this shortened, disproportionate torso, and it reminded Bill of children suffering from distended bellies. So though this creature was very thin, especially the neck, arms, and legs, its abdominal looked very swollen. Bill managed to watch this creature for the amount of time that it took him to drive from one power pole to the next. So I know that doesn't sound like a ton of time, but think about driving at night and, seeing a deer on the side of the road. Like, you can get a pretty good look at it, even for just 10 seconds or so, right? You know you're looking at a deer. So, Bill drives by the creature, and now he's thinking, what the hell did I just see? And he's pretty spooked. He asks his friends, did you guys see that? And his friends don't know what he's talking about. They did not see anything on the side of the road. So they tell him, well, turn the car around. Let's go back. Let's get out. Let's go look around and see if we can find what you saw. So they turn the car around. They get back to the spot between the two power poles, and they start looking at the stone wall from inside of the car. But now all three of them are a little bit creeped out. Like, what if the thing that Bill saw was something dangerous? They are much too scared to get out and look around, so they decide to just leave. I mean, would you get out of the car? I know I wouldn't get out of the car, especially if I had been the driver and I'd been the one who had seen it. Bill Bartlett actually has a photographic memory, which is so cool. And at the time, he was very artistic. And today, he actually works as an artist. But going back to the photographic memory, when Bill got home that night, he made use of this skill and he drew a picture of what he had seen. And this thing has been haunting my dreams for 3 days straight. And so I present this picture to you so that it can haunt you as well. And do you guys want to know what I think this looks like? Because I'm going to tell you. So stick with me. But what if this is a gray alien? Like, everything about this looks like a gray alien to me. The neck, the body, the arms. So obviously the head looks way too big for the body. But here's my theory. What if this portion of the head is actually a mask? Like, this part right here is obviously the skull, and the rest of the face here would look like the classic gray alien. But what if this portion is a face mask? Or, I don't know what it would be called, but a space mask? Like for breathing on a planet that it's not accustomed to. That's why you can't see a mouth or a nose, and the whole head has this kind of oblong look to it. Right? Right? I think it's hard to disagree with that. I really do. Did I just solve the Dover demon case? 44 years of mystery solved. Boom. It's a gray alien. Like, you're done. I think I solved it. So what makes this case really stand out, again in my opinion, is that the Dover demon was seen 2 more times within a very short time period by 2 other groups of people who were all in very close proximity to Farm Street. The second sighting of the Dover demon is the one that creeps me out the most. The second encounter happened around midnight, so it was roughly 2 hours after the original sighting by Bill Bartlett. 15-year-old John Baxter is walking home from his girlfriend's house all by himself. He was walking down Miller Hill Road, which is only like a 5-minute walk from Farm Street. And Farm Street is, I'm kind of considering it like ground zero for the very first sighting. John is walking down the road, and keep in mind that there are some street lamps on, but they're not perfect. All of a sudden, John notices somebody else on the road, and they are walking towards him. So their paths are going to cross on the side of this very dark road at midnight. Immediately, John notices that this person's head is really big, and he assumes that it's actually one of his friends who lives on the street, and they happen to have a big head, so it must be them, and they're also walking home. But the weird thing is that this friend doesn't say anything or wave or indicate that it is him. So John yells out to him and he says, "Hey MJ, is that you?" And the answer was no. It was not MJ. Whoever or whatever this thing was, it didn't respond, and it simply continued walking towards John. Quickly, it was very close to him, and John started to get a little bit nervous. But before their paths can actually cross, the person suddenly turns away from the road and bolts into the forested gully that was right beside them. Now, John is pretty unnerved by this, but also he's thinking that because of the height of this person, who only appeared to be about 3 or 4 feet tall, he's thinking this might have been a small child, and they just bolted into the dark forest. So not really thinking it through, John follows them into the forest. The creature went into the gully. It came up on the other side, and it just stood beside a tree. And the description of this creature from John was identical to Bill Baxter's earlier sighting. It was a brightly lit moon that night, so John was able to see this thing pretty clearly. It was standing high up on the other side of the gully, just watching him with these big, glowing eyes. It had these very long arms with even longer, thin fingers, and it was gripping these fingers around the trunk of a tree. Its feet also had these abnormally long toes, and John described its feet as molding to the rock which it was standing on top of. So again, that was very similar to how Bill Bartlett saw it when it was clinging to the rock wall in the first sighting. So it's pretty interesting to note that in Bill Bartlett's sighting, the demon was crawling along the rock wall. But in John's sighting, it was clearly walking on 2 legs. So perhaps it had the ability to walk on all 4s or only 2. Whatever the case, please don't follow creepy demon creatures into the woods at nighttime. That's just the rule of life. So picture this. This young kid is all alone in a dark forest, and there's this very scary humanoid creature only about 30 feet away from him, just staring. John is scared, and he quickly realizes that he probably should not have followed this thing, and every fiber in his being is telling him to leave the woods and get back to the road immediately. So thank God he makes it back to the street, and a young couple happens to be driving down Miller Hill Road, and they see him. They can see this young boy emerging from the woods, and his body language is suggesting that something is wrong because he is so shaken up from what he's just witnessed. So the couple stop, they pick him up, and they drive him home. Another chicken nugget of information that I noticed here was a possible sign of intelligent life, and I think it kind of goes along with my gray alien theory. So this creature was walking on the side of the road. It wasn't walking down the middle where traffic would come, right? I mean, if it had been a deer or a bear or a moose, it would have just been wandering in the middle of the road, don't you think? Like, deer don't follow pedestrian laws, These sightings took place in 1977, so no cell phones, no easy camera on hand. So the logical thing, again, was to go home and sketch another picture of this creature, and that is exactly what John did. And John's drawing was identical to Bill's drawing. The only difference was that John's drawing depicted the creature standing upright, exactly how he had seen it. Its long fingers were gripping the tree, its long toes gripped the rock, and the head was noticeably too large for the body. So I'm sure that some of you are assuming the same thing that I initially was. Like, did the 2 boys hatch this plan up? Did they both experience this creature separately? at 2 different times at 2 different locations? And then did they both go home to draw the same thing? But apparently no. Bill and John were not friends. I believe that they did know of one another because it was a small town, but they weren't friends. And Bill was also a couple of years older, so I don't think they hung around with the same group of people. Now, of course, you do have to take that with a grain of salt, but I think it's much more fun to believe them. So the next night, the Dover demon was seen again. This encounter took place on Springdale Avenue in Dover. And like John's encounter, it was very close to the first sighting on Farm Street, this time about a 6-minute drive away. 15-year-old Abby Brabham and her boyfriend, Will Trainter, are driving down Springfield Avenue at roughly 10 o'clock p.m. So it's dark, they have their headlights on, and suddenly Abby sees an animal crossing the road in front of them. It's walking on all fours, and her first reaction is that she actually thinks it's an ape or a monkey. She knows it's clearly not a bear, it's not a dog, it actually looks like an ape. And I mean, there are kind of similarities, no? Like, I'm trying to stay open-minded and think about all of the possibilities, and I do think they look kind of similar if you compare Bill and John's pictures to a picture of an ape. So with that theory, the first thing I think of is, okay, illegal animals as pets is definitely a very real thing, but in 2020, Dover only had a population of just under 6,000 people, so I can only imagine how much smaller Dover was in 1977, and I just find it hard to believe that somebody in this tiny town illegally owned a gorilla or an ape without people knowing about it. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe it's possible, but I do feel like that would be a pretty hard thing to hide. But Abby's description was on par with Bill and John's. This animal that she saw crossing the road had no fur, its skin was a tan color, and it had no tail, ears, mouth, or nose. Interestingly, Abby said that its eyes were glowing green in the car's headlights, so that was pretty much the only difference between her sighting and the other two. So I'm not exactly sure which of them began talking first, but the sightings were eventually reported to the Dover police. A newspaper article from May 16th, 1977 said that these 3 teenagers reported seeing a creature that, quote, resembled comic book conceptions of a spaceman at night last month along dark, lonely roads in this community. When these reports were originally reported to the police, officers took them seriously and they searched the areas where the creature had been seen, but of course, they didn't find anything. The article also mentioned Dover Police Chief Carl Sheridan, who vouched for Bill Bartlett and his original sighting. He said that Bill was, quote, an outstanding artist and a reliable witness. So I guess Bill was just a very good kid, or he was known as a good kid and somebody who wouldn't lie about something like this. As word about these sightings got out, the news eventually reached Lauren Coleman, who is one of the world's leading cryptozoologists. So, cryptozoology is the study of and search for animals, and especially legendary animals, such as Sasquatch, Loch Ness Monster, or again, the North American house hippo.
House hippos are very timid creatures and are rarely seen, but they will defend their territory if provoked.
and it's usually in order to evaluate the possibility of their existence. And Lauren Coleman actually traveled to Dover to speak with the witnesses about what they saw, and it was him who also named the creature the Dover Demon. Coleman interviewed the teenagers within a week of their sightings, and he believed them. He said that 1, the teens didn't know each other, they weren't good friends, and also the sightings happened during a vacation from school, so in his words, they had not contaminated each other by talking about it. After the interviews, Bill Bartlett discovered something that he found very interesting. He said that if you take all 3 of their sightings and you place them on a map of Dover, the path that the creature was walking on was almost a perfectly straight line. So, it looked like this thing was walking towards a specific destination, and it happened to run into 3 people along the way. Many people believe that the creature seen was a baby moose, but just as many people are fast to point out there weren't any moose in the area. And perhaps the biggest argument against this theory is that moose simply do not walk upright on 2 legs, and they certainly do not walk on top of small brick walls. So another little nugget with honey mustard sauce of information that I think gives credit to this story is the fact that the Dover Demon was only seen this 1 night, or 2 nights, and it's never been seen since. I think the funnest theory here is that it was a gray alien in a space mask, and I am sticking with that theory. But please let me know what you guys think it was. Do you believe it was a dog, a fox, maybe it was a moose, or maybe you're on my side and you also believe that it was an alien? Let me know what you think. I'm very curious to know your theories. And other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video / podcast style on YouTube. I don't really know what you would call this, but I really hope you liked it. I hope you found it interesting, creepy, and maybe you even found it relaxing, which is just a bonus. But anyways, thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. If you could please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for the algorithm. It helps me out so much. And of course, it's not just me. If you do that for your favorite content creators, it helps us out so much. And we really thank you for it. So, I have you. I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful night, and I will see you again very soon. Goodbye, everybody.